were such a course. So how this will work is we'll kind of start from square one with exploitation, and we'll go over that, and we'll start learning about vulnerabilities, identifying vulnerabilities, and I think the best way to do that is trying to understand it at a source code level. So you could do a code audit, for instance, where you actually have the source. Can you go in there and find the vulnerabilities? And some of you are very skilled and talented at doing return-oriented programming or even other code reuse attacks. Others of you have no idea, and that's great, but we also want to work on discovering vulnerabilities, finding the bugs. That's going to be, something that I want to emphasize, to give some focus to. So we'll start with square one, work with vulnerabilities, and we'll get into a variety of different types of exploits. Start basic, and we'll get more advanced as we go along. The difficulty will increase. So I do have a little slide here that we'll kind of go through, and some of you already know me, so this isn't really new information, but there are many students who may not know me, and it's good for them to learn a little bit about myself. I don't really talk too much about myself generally, just because I don't think students really care or are interested, and I really want us to focus on the work. And so name is Dr. Bramwell Brizendine. You can call me Dr. Brizendine or Bramwell. Either one is fine, doesn't make any difference to me. Assistant professor of cyber computer sciences at DSU. For those of you who are not familiar with academic faculty ranks, there's a significant difference between instructor versus assistant professor. The latter is tenure track, meaning you're on the road to potentially gaining tenure, and that can involve significant differences in pay and responsibility. You're also responsible for more, so you need to do research. So I do perform research. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Is graduate students, some students take graduate courses because they want to become a professor. A lot of times in computer science or cybersecurity or those types of fields, cyber operations, they do it just because they want to work in the field. They have no desire to ever teach professionally. And this course is designed for both of them. For online students, we do have a number of PhD students, and the reason for that is this course it's not required for PhD students, but it is strongly recommended, and if they don't take it, then there is a next level to this class, 848. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but students do struggle greatly. I've had 4 incompletes in the 848 last semester just because it was too much for them. And I'll avoid allowing those in the future. It was a mistake for me to even allow those, but it is what it is. So 748 provides us with an introduction to exploitation. We can learn some of the basics. When you get into 848, or if you get into it, and some of you have master students, you won't get into it. Although you can, it is allowed for students to take that. I think there's a special process to get permission. And I think it's a space available basis too. But it can be a more challenging course. So I've completed 2 master's degrees, one in applied computer science and then information assurance with specialization in computer security or whatever it was called at the time. That has since become the cyber defense degree. Completed the PhD in cyber operations. If you don't know, PhD in cyber operations is, to some extent, is kind of like a specialized computer science PhD. Not really, but it is somewhat similar in the sense that it does require a master's degree in computer science or applied computer science to progress in it. So if you have, the cyber defense, that's that master's. There's some other masters, then that's typically considered not acceptable. At least that's what I had been told. I think in the past that has been different, but I've been told a number of times by Dr. Wayne Pauli that is now the requirement. So most of you on campus, I think all of you are Masters of Computer Science students. Is that correct? Anybody who's not? What are you?
I'm in the PhD program.
Okay. So, and like I said, everybody's welcome. We have all kinds of, different students. A lot of the online students have no experience in reverse engineering or exploitation, and I expect that. Some of my interests are code reuse attacks, what they are, I'm not necessarily interested in exploits that make use of them, but I also just enjoy studying the intrinsic nature of them. So return-oriented programming, jump-oriented programming. I was very interested in the intrinsic nature of JOP. And so that was the focus of my dissertation research. I created a tool called the JOP Rocket, and that actually ended up being presented at DEF CON. A couple of the students in this class helped out during the summer, Austin and Jonathan. So they're familiar with the JOP Rocket, and some of them they're both very, very skilled at doing JOP. So I was very impressed with both of them. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but other interests, just reverse engineering in general, software exploitation, malware analysis. I'm much more of an offensive security person. Penetration testing, to some extent, I'm less interested in that. I'm more interested in the low-level technical side of it. I do teach 436 online, but I definitely prefer, and also teaching the offensive security during the summer, which is kind of a somewhat similar to that, but more at a non-computer science graduate level perspective. I should actually turn this into a slide. I'm acting like one of those incompetent people who don't know how to use PowerPoint. Mount Rainier is one of the premier destinations in the Pacific Northwest. Has anybody been in the Pacific Northwest? Show of hands. How long?
It was just
Okay, a week isn't long enough.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go there now.
You are going to?
Yeah, eventually.
Nice. That's probably the hardest part for me about coming to DSU, as I am from Washington State, is just leaving all of that behind, just because there's a vast difference in just the majestic beauty of everything. It's completely absent. I guess the Badlands, which I've never been to, or people are laughing, so maybe it's not so majestic. I was talking about it in my reverse engineering course or malware analysis course, and people were telling me to go check that out, but I don't know. I wasn't quite convinced before. In any case, Mount Rainier this picture really doesn't do it justice. When you go on some types of hiking trails, there are places where you have absolutely majestic, sublime, breathtaking views that can just really transformative, change your view and your outlook, and others that are just kind of boring, like what a lot of the wilderness, I think, in the Midwest, is just very dull and uninspiring. One feature of Mount Rainier that I was very pleased with was the Wonderland Trail, which is, they have this trail that goes all around Mount Rainier, about 100 miles. About 250 to 300 people a year go on it, and it's considered to be one of the more difficult long-distance hiking trails in the country just because of changes in elevation. You go up a considerable incline, which for some people that can be physically taxing. For me, it hadn't been. I've done a lot of running in the past. I probably ran more than 10,000 miles in my lifetime, so it's, going up incline doesn't really bother me. But for other people, it just really depends on your background. I've seen old people, little old ladies, everybody's body is different. Some people incline doesn't bother them. Some people it does. So if you get an opportunity to go to Mount Rainier, I would recommend it. Joseph, Oregon. It's very nice and great views, but it's, if you're on a scale of 1 to 10, Mount Rainier is probably a 10 in Joseph, Oregon, even though it's a lot of great views, and it's probably a 6, because a lot of it's just the same types of views repeated over and over and not a lot of variety, whereas somewhere like Mount Rainier is complete, a spectrum of everything that's possible. Joseph, Oregon is more family oriented too, so a lot more people. If you're doing the long distance overnight type of thing on like you did in Mount Rainier, which I did, the longest I've done there is I did like 33 miles or something, and over 2 nights and 3 days. For those, the campsites are competitive, so they limit the number of people. If you go on some of the day hike type areas, then you'll encounter a number of people. But if you're going on the longer trails, then there are long periods of time where you don't encounter anybody. So Yellowstone, it's 5 years ago. One of my favorite places. I'm sad that it's been 5 years since I've been there, but it is what it is. I've been there a couple times. When I go there, I'd like to do as many day hikes as possible. So from dawn to dusk, I'm out there doing many different day hikes. I've never tried to do overnight backpacking in Yellowstone. I don't know, kind of apprehensive about bears and there's enough good day hikes there, that long day hikes, that I can combine a bunch of them and be satisfied, but we'll see what the future brings. DEF CON, this is last August, so as part of my dissertation research into jump-oriented programming, created the JOP rocket, created the tool and went there and presented it. It's probably, I'd say, the first or the most significant code reuse attack tool in probably the last decade. So if you historically go back and look at it, you can look at the Mona Python script, which goes like 10 or 11 years old. That's very well used for return-oriented programming. And then JOP, there's really nothing else that is out there. The only other thing that I probably would rival that is there's a Python script called ROP Gadget, which is 5 or 6 years old, and that is somewhat well known. I think it's definitely more well known than JOP Rocket because it's fairly well known or fairly new, and I've only presented it at DEF CON in a local DSU conference. I am trying to bring it to Hack in the Box. I've applied to that, and I'm going to apply to some other places in the future as well. So that was a great opportunity to be involved with DEF CON, and Austin also contributed, and he helped towards some of that. He's very skilled at JOP, right, Austin? Do you know the story about the ancient rocket cats? Okay. So when I came up with the JOP rocket, I tried to come up with an acronym because I had referred to it previously as just like the Brizendine tool and just trying to be more academic about it. And somebody told me that, actually Josh Droshine told me, that's Josh right there. You can see he's actually taller than I am. He told me I should get an acronym, so I came up with Rocket Reversing Open Cyber Knowledge Expert Tool. So if you use the JOP Rocket, that means you're automatically an expert. So, but anyway, I like to favor cats in a lot of my presentations. I'm not sure if I'll do it in this class or not. I haven't decided yet because I'm planning on making all new everything, mostly all new. So we may not have that, but in any case, I use cats very heavily. So I thought, if Rocket is the name, can I somehow make the cat my mascot in a way? And so what I did, of course, is I just did a search on Google, Rocket Cat, and I came up with all these ancient rocket cats. And you see, these are from manuscripts from the 1200s, 1300s, that have been digitized, and academics are writing about them. There's Latin, they're translated, and it tells the story of the rocket cats and rocket doves, or I don't even know how to say that they're what they are, but some kind of rocket birds. And the idea was that they would put some kind of explosive on their back and let the cat go, and the cat would somehow be able to get into the well-defended castle, penetrate it, and it could bring fire and destruction. So all this faith and trust was placed into the cats. The cat, a human or a knight couldn't get through because, they'd be killed, but the cat might find some kind of small little opening because it lives in the castle of their town, and it'll get in there, or the bird will just fly to its home, which somehow is magically inside a castle. And despite the fact that they have these explosives with actual literal fire, they're smoking, it's going to run to their home. So now that appeared in a number of different historical manuscripts, but if you think about it, it really doesn't make much sense. And modern historians have kind of disputed this and said, we see these images, and these are all from different sources here, at least 4 of them there. And we question whether or not that's actually possible. I mean, if you have that type of device on a cat, is it going to run some distance and get inside whatever it needs to get into? Probably not. It's going to be concerned with getting that burning thing off of it, or it's going to be freaking out. So it turns out, this is probably more wishful thinking on the part of whoever wrote these manuscripts and illustrated them. But the reason why I made it use it with JOP is because it goes to the idea of there can be some countermeasures, some mitigations that can defend against return-oriented programming, ROP, but they may not always consider JOP. So to that extent, then JOP could create a side door. It can create a way in there despite this mitigation. So that's kind of the story behind that. Badge, I got it at DEF CON for being a speaker, blue, special color. If you have a special role there, then you get, each year the badges that they give you is going to be completely different. Some of them are very elaborate. This, I think, is some kind of gemstone.
Yeah, it's quartz. They cut 27,000 of those.
Yeah. So you were there?
Yeah.
You come see me?
I was in the blue or the blue team village, and I completely forgot about that. But like afterwards, I was like, I knew you were speaking, and I just completely.
Well, that's okay. You had your own stuff to go there, and I'm sure you probably spent money and time to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And you were deeply involved in blue team stuff, but not red team though.
Oh.
That's okay.
Did you get your badge unlocked?
What?
Did you get your badge unlocked all the way?
No, I wasn't really too concerned with that. But other people were, so I constantly had people wanting to touch my badge and come up to me. And sometimes I'd be standing there waiting for somebody, and I have like 20 people that come and like, can I touch your badge? And It was kind of amusing. I enjoyed it.
We actually like cloned a Dark Captain's badge and just used a hacker app to unlock a whole bunch of them.
You did what?
We cloned a Dark Captain's badge with a hacker app and unlocked like 4 of them.
Oh, wow. Very talented.
Or did it was
I also got invited to the OG, which is a Google event that happens at the same time. And the reason why is usually just small number of people, maybe 100, 200 people, I don't know. Usually people that are working with Google or hackers. I got invited just because I was a speaker at DEF CON. I don't know if they invited every speaker, but maybe they just liked the premise of my talk. And so I went there, and that was their badge, which was much less interesting, kind of disappointing. So that was, it was kind of a small club, I forget where, and I had opportunity to go in there and speak to some of their people, their security people that are dealing with bug bounties and exploits, and so got to learn a little bit about some of what they're looking for and opportunities that are available there. And so that was very interesting. People who are taking a class like this, that could be something that, would potentially, be of interest to them. And we'll talk about some of those kinds of things later on. So what we're going to do today is just kind of some background information. We'll have our first real class session on Thursday. But today we're just kind of getting to know each other and introducing the class. And I think that not knowing assembly will put you at a disadvantage, but I think it's doable. You may need to study a little bit on assembly and how some of that works when we get to that. There'll be I'll talk about some of this more later on, but I'll provide some resources for people who don't have as much of a background, and so you will have to work a little bit harder, and we'll need to maybe study a little bit about assembly. We will be doing some stuff with shellcode later on, which that is kind of writing things in assembly. But if you want to work hard, then I think you can still be in the class. I don't think it is open to anybody. There are no prerequisites, but you will need to probably work a little bit harder. It was a challenging course. So with that, I wanted to also get to our syllabus. So it sounds like, if I'm correct, most people have very limited, in this classroom, very limited or no software exploitation experience, with the exception of John and Austin, who worked with me fairly extensively over the summer. Is that a fair assessment? Okay, well, that's good for me to know, just in terms of the content in this course and how I present things. And like I said, we'll start at the basic level, and we'll get to probably somewhat intermediate level. And if you want to learn other advanced stuff, then there's 848 too. We may touch on some advanced topics too, but it's not all going to be very simple, easy. It'll start easier in the beginning, but then it'll become more difficult. And not everything we do may necessarily be software exploitation. I know when Josh taught it, some of his labs were which he shared some of his labs with me. Some of them are just non-software exploitation. So some of those types of things I probably won't do too much with. We'll focus more our energies and efforts more on exploitation. And so our course description, what we're doing in this class is learning advanced exploitation techniques. We will include automated exploitation, exploitation discovery. That's discovering, are there vulnerabilities? What are the vulnerabilities? How can I make use of those vulnerabilities? So we have to understand the nature of the vulnerabilities themselves. How can we encounter them in source code? Or how can we encounter them in a binary? Once we do encounter them, what do we do? How do we develop them? If you use something like Ghidra is nice because, and this will probably be really useful for people who may not have had assembly. You can use Ghidra because it will do decompilation. Decompilation means instead of just presenting you with the disassembly, it'll try to turn it into a pseudocode like C or C++. So if you've learned one of those types of languages, and you can read or understand it to some extent, then that'll be useful. Makes it a lot easier. Once we get an exploit, how do we develop it? Vulnerability analysis. When we find the vulnerability, how do we analyze it? How do we see if it's exploitable? Not every vulnerability is going to be exploitable. Debugging. Debugging is going to be the heart of exploit development, using tools like WinDebug or x64 debug or Immunity or Ollie debug. How can we use those to develop our exploit? When you're developing an exploit, you're going to spend a significant amount of time dealing with the debugger. So it's a great way to get more familiar with some of those things. Some of it can be very time-consuming. Some might say very tedious, especially the more advanced you get. Some of the stuff that John and Austin were doing over the summer were very time-consuming and to do. Fuzzing. How can we? This is a black box approach to something. It's nice if you have the source code, and there's a lot of if something's open source, you can go out. Even though like VLC, most of you probably know what VLC is. Maybe you use it a lot to watch shows or videos or whatever. You can go and you get the source code. So even though it's a compiled binary that you might download, you could go and check out the source code, analyze it for vulnerabilities. You find a vulnerability, and then you can see if you can reach that. When you're looking at vulnerabilities, you also want to consider input. Do I have some path to reach that vulnerability? Because if there's no path for you to get to the vulnerability, then it's going to be useless to you. So if it's plain media files, potentially some video, that might be your way to get in there. And then once it gets in there, you can trace that input. What functions does it go through? So fuzzing is a black box approach that you can do fuzzing manually, where you're sending deliberately mal-crafted input. So buffer overflow is something that a lot of people are familiar with, and maybe you find a way to send it 500 A's or whatever to crash it, to cause an overflow. And you could do that manually, but there are tools that can automate that process for you. And you can get very advanced and sophisticated with fuzzing. And as you get more and more advanced, fuzzing becomes more and more important. We'll talk more extensively about fuzzing. I don't want to go into deep lectures on every little topic here. Shellcode. Shellcode is going to be, essentially, this is something that is written in assembly, but is position independent. I need to monitor this carefully. I'm not used to having two classes back to back. Maybe I can use this. Solves my problem. So, position independence. Does anybody know what that means? Austin? With shellcode? Why do you want shellcode to be position independent?
I mean,
Like you think back to like the project or
I'm trying to think it. So like, you mean like you have a big map split at the beginning or something, so it can be a little bit off, and it'll still end up doing the right thing of being aligned correctly? Necessarily.
not quite. Just think back to the main motivating factor that you had behind the project in the reverse engineering course. Why would you go and search for a base address for a DLL? Or maybe I'm putting you on the spot. So with shellcode, position independence means, and why you would do something like this is a lot of the students in this class have been through a similar, what we call the project, where you'd go in there, you'd find the base address of a DLL, and then you would work through the PEB, and eventually you would find a specific address for a function. You could call that function. It could be something like, any type of function. Maybe you're doing virtual alloc. And the reason why you would need to do that with shellcode is because when you introduce assembly into, somehow you get it and you get EIP or the CPU moves and it's going to start executing this assembly. We're not worried about mitigations or any of that. We don't care about all of that. It's going there, it's trying to execute this assembly. It doesn't know where anything is. It doesn't know the address of DLLs or addresses of functions. We need to find those. So shellcode can be very complex, and so that gets us to the idea of position independence. Shellcode is position independent, doesn't necessarily know where all that stuff is, because when you compile something, you compile a binary, all the addresses of the needed everything is going to be made available to you through the PE file format. We'll talk more extensively about that, so if you don't understand now, it's not a problem. Mitigation techniques. This says both Windows and Linux platforms will be covered. I do have one slide that we'll talk a little bit about some Linux stuff, a little bit of null dereferencing, but 99% of this is going to be Windows. At least that's my current plan. Our labs are going to be 100% Windows. Just for relevancy, if you're going to go out and actually do this type of work, then you're going to be working in a Windows environment. I don't have any desire to teach you Linux just because you love Linux and you think it's cool and it's fun. And to me, that's just kind of a hobbyist pursuit. I'm trying to teach you information that could be useful to you if you actually want to go further with this and to make use of it. Course prerequisites, none. Ideally, you should have some understanding of assembly. However, again, it's not required. You can make do. It'll just make things more difficult. Reverse engineering would be nice, but a lot of students do not have that, particularly online students. One reason for that is a lot of universities do not teach reverse engineering. So if people haven't been to DSU, then they may have never had a reverse engineering course. Some places do teach malware analysis courses, and I've looked at some of them, but to me the quality doesn't seem to be quite the same. And speaking of college level courses, there are some trainings that are available, and some of those are very high quality. We do have some required textbooks. Gray Hat Hacking, Ethical Hackers Handbook, 5th edition. Don't get an earlier edition because it's not going to be useful. And Shell Coder's Handbook. Shell Coder's Handbook is very old, but it has some good stuff. Some of the stuff is going to be dated and may not be relevant. But some of that knowledge we'll get the knowledge out of it that we can, that is relevant. And I'm not one of these professors who like to tell you everything is going to come from the labs or from sitting and watching a lecture for 1 hour a week. You'll need to do more reading and studying on your own. If you don't, you probably won't understand it because there's just so much to go over. When Austin and John were working, we gave them a number of resources. Working from here this summer, they gave them a number of resources to look at, and I know they spent a fair amount of time studying different things, and that's one way to build your knowledge. If you're not willing to read and look at sources, and you're not going to get too far. I'll also provide other additional resources that are online, and those will be announced later on. Right now I don't have a reading schedule for us. We'll start that probably next week or maybe on Thursday. Again, we're going to start basic. We'll start with vulnerabilities and then move on to exploitation. If you want to, if you've never used IDAPRO and you want to learn that, you could get the IDAPRO book. That'll go over it in exhaustive detail. So I would encourage you to do so if you have no experience with it. But again, you don't have to. There are other options to learn information. So if you don't have zero reverse engineering knowledge, and this will be true for many of our online students, then some other options are plural site courses. Plural site courses, not just anybody can go on there and have a plural site course. They're very, at least to my understanding, they're very strict about who they allow to do that, and they provide significant financial rewards. So if you make a number of plural site courses, you're going to be raking in some money. So they do have ways to assure quality. So some of these courses are very well done. A lot of the courses are very more fast-paced. It's not like a DSU course where you have a couple hours each week. Everything will be condensed down very significantly. So some things you could check out. Josh Droshein has a Pluralsight course. You can check out Getting Started with Reverse Engineering. That'd be one to check out. Jared DeMott, he is extremely well known in exploitation. He's previously taught at DSU, and he was on my dissertation committee. He has some stuff you could check out. So if you want to learn about reverse engineering, he also has exploit development or fuzzing. We'll talk about some of that. Code auditing. So either of those are good background information. I can also provide access to a reverse engineering course that I taught. Josh Droshein has some reverse engineering videos from courses he's taught. You want some of those videos, I can provide those as well. So if you have problems understanding, then you just take the opportunity to watch some of the videos, do some readings on your own. And again, as we go through some of this stuff, and when we first start using a Ghidra or an IDAPRO window bug, I will spend some time going over it and explaining it, but it'll be more accelerated. So if you want additional information, then you'll need to dig a little bit deeper on your own through videos or other online resources or books. If you really want to learn debugging extensively, there are a couple books I could recommend. Some that go into great detail, particularly WinDebug specific books. Other sources, I'll make other things available, other links, PDFs. If I make something available to read, I encourage you to read them. This is a graduate level course, so I do expect more from you in terms of reading and work that you may do than I would at an undergraduate. Sometimes with undergraduate students, you wonder if they're even doing the readings at all. In this course, I will be assured that you will be doing all the readings. I won't question it. And part of the reason why is because we will have a final exam that will cover everything that's in our readings or that we cover in class. And this is going to be looking more at the big picture. It's not going to be something where I go in there. Sometimes you have a class and it's like the professor has obviously never read any of the books, and they go in there and they pick some random question and they ask you some random fact that is irrelevant. This exam is not going to be like that. It will be, actually measuring your understanding. So you don't need to know every little minute, obscure detail, but you will need to know the things that we do cover, and you'll need to be able to explain them in your own words. So it's not going to be multiple choice, pick and choose, and hope for the best, or just hope that I see the correct answer and recognize it. You'll need to know the correct answer because you'll need to write the correct answer. I won't provide it for you. It won't be an option for you. So again, it's not going to be one of those exams where it's looking for very minute, obscure details. It's big picture. Do you really understand this? Can you convince me that you actually did the readings, that you participated in the course, that you watched the videos, that you understood everything? I'm not sure how we'll do that. It'll be online. It'll probably use the Respondus lockdown browser, so that means that you can't go and look up other sources. And it'll also have video monitoring. So I'll probably still do that even in class, but it'll probably be, we may have that in class, or it might be something you do at home on your own. I don't know at this point. But in either case, we will use that. So it's not something that you need to really be afraid of. If you're doing the readings and everything and understand the material, then you'll be in good shape. The questions will be open-ended. So it'll be a chance for you to show off your knowledge. Otherwise, the majority of our content comes from labs, assignments, be 80% of the grade. The reason why I'm even having the final exam is really because of PhD students. I want to ensure that, because they will be going, if we're going to 12-15, I don't know why they're leaving. Maybe they're undergraduate or freshmen, sophomores. But I want us to ensure that if you're a PhD student, you're going on to the 848, that you have a mastery of these basic concepts. If you don't, then that'll be reflected in your grade, and maybe you need to retake the class. So I don't want those people to think that it is optional, because it's not. So unfortunately, the reason we have the final exam is just to make sure people are actually learning it. 90% of you would do that on your own, but there's always the few that won't, and sometimes it's those few that cause the most problems for the instructor, that take up the most amount of time because they're not doing the readings and they don't understand things. And assignments, I do expect you to show in detail how you arrive at a solution. If you don't just want to drop a screenshot and leave it at that, you'll get significant point reductions. Explain it in a coherent, somewhat well written, well articulated document. This is not a writing course, but you guys are also graduate students, so I had to have a higher expectation for quality of writing than undergraduates. Some undergraduates, they may do very good work, but the quality of the writing could be somewhat lacking. So just try to polish it up, make it presentable. Do your best, and I think you should be fine. So if you provide a screenshot, include a description, explain what's going on, provide analysis. Does it need to be long and lengthy? I don't want to read 20, 25 page things. You can be concise, you can be densely packed with relevant details, and those are hallmarks of good writing. Being concise is a virtue. If you have something that is 20, 25 pages and it doesn't need to be, then that may be because it's just too much irrelevant information, or it's poorly written, it's very repetitive. I do provide a grace period of 7 days for all assignments. Unlimited number of grace periods. The only time the grace period does not apply is at the end of the semester, and I'll let you know. Because I'll try to finish the semester on time. I'm not going to be accepting things to the last minute because I need to be done. So there'll just be a need for us to finish on time, and when we get closer to that, I'll let you know what the due dates are and whether we make the due dates or we don't. Some people are busy, particularly a lot of our online students who may be working full-time jobs. So take that into consideration as you're planning your final weeks in the class, that you'll know that you'll need to make the deadlines without grace periods. And if you are busy, then you may have to make some personal adjustments to make sure things get done. Our learning outcomes, we're learning about static and dynamic analysis, so we'll get opportunity to work with the different tools. Things like WinDebug, x64 Debug, IDAPRO, Ghidra, those are going to be our primary things. Specific debuggers, we mentioned those, IDAPRO, Ghidra, exploitation, Stack Overflows, return-oriented programming, other. Some of this is just text I just copied from what Josh had. I'm not sure all of the exploitation topics that we will deal with, but it will all be stuff that involves Windows PE files, so there won't be any web-based exploitation. Reverse engineering of binary code. So if you've never taken a reverse engineering course before or don't know how to do that, you'll learn how to do that. x86 instruction set. So hopefully I haven't made this class sound too difficult or undoable, because again, this is, this course does have no prerequisites, and a lot of students are coming to this program that may not have a background in some of that material. That said, if you don't have a background on that material, then you need to do a little bit more studying on your own than a student who may have already had a reverse engineering course. ADA, if that's an issue, feel free to let me know. Diversity statement, we need to be respectful of everybody based on race, ethnicity, nationality, disability status, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religious or political beliefs, and this goes for on campus or online. If people are given problems or harassed in any way or anything offensive, then I can give you a 0 for the course. That's my way of saying you're gone from the course. Because I don't think there is a way to remove students from a course except for special circumstances, so it's kind of my way of dealing with that. Academic dishonesty. I don't want to go over all this, but do read it carefully because I cover everything and I do enforce it. What that can mean is you can get the grade of a 0 on an assignment if you do academic dishonesty, or I could fail you from the class from a 1 offense. It's in the syllabus, so it's there. And it's at my discretion. So it really just depends on how serious it is, or if I know you have a previous background in academic dishonesty, or but it can encompass other types of things too. Taking code, making cosmetic changes, renaming it, that can be plagiarism. So if we're doing something in shellcode and you go and I say write your own shellcode, and you go and steal somebody else's shellcode and present that as your own, and maybe make a few trivial changes, and if I detect that, I can count that as a plagiarism, and I would do so. Some of that stuff can be harder to detect. If it's written content, that's easy for me to detect. There's automated tools, and usually I can just notice. If you try to hire somebody to do your schoolwork, which I've had people do, I've actually gotten an email from somebody in Australia because of one of my students in reverse engineering was trying to hire them to do their assignment. And they found me. The student thought he was being smart about it, but the student wasn't smart enough, and that person still found me and contacted me, and the student didn't do very well on the course. You do get referred to academic integrity board. It goes on your record. You may get some penalties or consequences from the Dean of Students. That's applicable to on campus as well as online. If you have enough of these offenses, then you could be suspended or kicked out of the school. And for some of you who may be interested in getting security clearances or things of that nature, you obviously don't want to have these kinds of black marks on your record. And I'd say 90% of the students in cyber operations, potentially, you may want a security clearance. You may not want it now, but you may want to consider it in the future. So you always want to leave that door open as a possibility. So be smart about it. If it does happen, it doesn't necessarily mean it's at the end of the world, but it could be the one thing that pushes you to a no. So if you're really struggling, reach out for help, or if you're trying to do something at the last minute and you found something you were thinking, I want to plagiarize it, just take the 0 instead. Don't chance it. Unauthorized collaboration is something that I also deal with and penalize. So if you decide I'm going to be partners with this person, or we're going to work together, and they complete everything, and they're going to share it with me, or they're going to share significant parts of it with me, and I'm just going to copy it and make cosmetic changes. That's unauthorized collaboration. If I detect that, then I can penalize both parties, both the enabler and also the recipient. You can still work with people and collaborate. I know a lot of DSU students, both online and on campus, like to collaborate together. That's fine. But you want to think of it, how would a tutor do it? How would a teacher do it? So help them to find the information, help them to understand so that they can realize some of that information and content for themselves. Point them in the right direction, but don't give them the answer. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Some students need more help than others, but I can tell you that I worked with lots of students in my office, helping them, and I was a tutor before myself in the past, and everybody can be helped, regardless of their level of understanding. It's just sometimes you just need to work a little bit harder and spend more time with them. So I think that's everything for the syllabus. There's also a frequently asked question. I won't go over that in this class, but I'd say to go ahead and read that. Basically, the main takeaways are, if you're doing unauthorized, if I'm speaking, then you're not speaking. So I don't want you visiting with the neighbor or playing on a laptop or doing things on a tablet or a cell phone, writing emails. Any of those types of things I can penalize with 2% point reduction, which it's explained in here. As long as you're in class, you're paying attention, not trying to talk when I'm talking, and then there shouldn't be any issues. There is a library website. Some of the book material may be available there. I haven't checked. But if you look up the DSU library website, the Carl Moond, there'll be a thing called Safari Tech Pages, or O'Reilly Safari. And you just go there and it'll give you a list of options, select the one that says not here, and then it'll ask for your email address, and then it should be pretty straightforward in any case. They do have hundreds, maybe thousands of books, and so it's possible that your required books may be there. I haven't checked, so if you want to try and save money, feel free to do so. Discussion board posts, I do expect everybody to contribute to that, even though you've talked in class. This may be a great way to maybe see also what some of the online students are doing, if you're interested. If not, that's fine too. I do encourage you to make use of Pulse. That's an app you can get on your phone that connects to D2L, so you can get notifications on news items or homework assignments, grades you get. Maybe you don't want to know, or maybe you do want to know. Office hours, that information is right here. So these are on campus. We also have online, which is by appointment. We can talk on the phone or through Zoom. Sometimes I can come in on Friday for on campus if you make an appointment with me during that time. It just depends. But online is always an option. And I do ask you check the office hours page here, because if there's a snow event or I have a health appointment or some kind of meeting I need to go to, I'll put that here. I'm not going to clog up your D2L with stuff about my office hours, so you can always check there if you're not sure. Some important topics that we will be covering. We'll be learning about the PE file format. Show of hands, how many people know the PE file format? You don't know, Nick?
I know.
Have to refresh, I guess.
Okay.
Like if you called on me and told me to explain it, like
So we're learning about that, get some background information on that. Some of that will be review for some of you. For some of you, maybe learning it the first time. We're learning about dynamic analysis. We'll be focusing really on these tools. This is probably, I shouldn't say more powerful, I should say very powerful, but because x64 debug is also very powerful too. These ones are both dated, especially this one. If you're doing it in the GUI, graphical user interface, you want to probably do it in x64 debug. Static analysis, we'll be doing primarily IDA and Ghidra. We'll learn about shellcode writing. Not right away, but at some point we will spend some time on doing that. So some of you know how to find shellcode and use it, but how do you write your own? Memory corruption bugs, what are they? How can we make use of them? Can we understand vulnerabilities, understand the process of vulnerability discovery? Fuzzing from a manual standpoint, as well as automated tools. We're learning about buffer overflows, we're learning about SEH overwrite, we're learning about use after free bugs. Code reuse attacks. We've talked a lot about JOP, but JOP is actually very complicated and advanced, and I think most students, I shouldn't say most students, but it would take a lot of work to get there, and if you're a doctoral student, you'll encounter that in 848. But right now, I do not currently have plans to do JOP in this class, but it's possible that may change. But probably doubtful. Mitigations, what are they? What are some bypasses? We'll bypass depth for sure. We'll talk about ASLR bypass. I'm not sure if we'll do that. That's a little bit more advanced. We may. Some basic reverse engineering knowledge, understanding the x86 assembly instruction set. So do we have any questions from anybody about anything? All right, well, I'll see you guys on Thursday. We'll probably have an introductory assignment then that won't be exploitation, but it'll maybe start to get us thinking. All right, well, see you guys later.